So you might have recently heard the news that Oda has said that all One Piece theories are bad, and even a very prominent Japanese theorist quitting his channel after 5 years after hearing those news, the statements that Oda did on a radio show. And I thought it was very important to make a video about this, not only because it affects everything that we love about the story, but I'm a channel that does a lot of theory content and really enjoys doing a lot of theory content. And I, of course, when I saw this, asked myself, does Oda hate what I do here? And I think there are a bunch of misunderstandings to address here, but also some very serious comments that I think we need to discuss as a community and also as people who do like to create and or consume theory content. Now, what basically happened here is that Oda went on the radio show of a comedian called Shimofuri Seiya, and he kind of talked a little bit about, fan theories in general and his thoughts on it. And I do want to read you the translation, the direct translation of what he said in Japanese here instead of what you might think. Because I think everyone just has this impression that Oda said, theories suck, they're so bad for, the story, and I don't want anyone to make theories, and that's why Yuderon, who is the YouTuber who actually, quit his channel after these news. In case you don't know, Yuderon and me have a very special connection. I did cover one of his really big One Piece theories back in the day, added like a lot of my ideas to it, and then kind of put that out, and it went against my complete expectations, completely viral, and kickstarted a lot of, theorizing in general in the One Piece community, I think in like 2020. And Yuderon was just very famous in Japan, but also, for a foreign audience, for these deep dive, really specific, drilling down on the Japanese language of all of One Piece and just finding the most fascinating connections, wordplays that Oda did with the most amazing theories that I've ever consumed myself. And I think it's important to understand here also that being a Japanese speaker, Yuderon obviously was able to drill down a lot more here than, most English speakers ever can. I do try, as someone who speaks Japanese and is still learning Japanese, to, look at the Japanese way that Oda uses names and connects things myself, but obviously I will never be able to do that as effectively and efficiently as someone who's a Japanese native speaker does. So with that little piece of information in mind, let's actually read through the core statement here. So Oda said the following thing: fan theories have become so accurate that they sometimes predict the future of the story, so I stopped looking at them. But it's dangerous to assume that all readers are at that level, and he says they're at that level of understanding of the story, and there are also a lot of casual readers, so I do need to draw the story in a way that everyone can consume and enjoy it. And he goes on to say, when I see people with high levels of understanding, I start thinking that I can just skip entire explanations because they'll get it anyway, and that would rot me as a creator. And then Oda goes on to laugh in the interview, and so I don't look at anyone's theories anymore, and I just want everyone to enjoy the story together. Now, from this statement alone, I hope you already get a feeling that this entire news segment is a lot more nuanced than people might make it seem to be actually on the internet. Alright guys, very quickly, Manu from 1 hour in the future here. I actually went and listened to the entire podcast, and I do have to clarify some more things here. Anything that I'm gonna say after this is still very relevant and still plays a role here, and you should absolutely go and listen to it, but I do need to clarify a few things here that I think are really, really, really crucial. So, first things first, when you actually listen to the podcast that this all refers to, Oda is not in this podcast at all. It is the comedian's podcast or radio show, but he talks to another person. They just mention Oda because the comedian Seiya-san and Oda apparently are friends, or at least friendly, and know each other, and Oda is not a part of this. So everything that you've read is basically this person paraphrasing what Oda kind of told them, or the feeling that they got from something that Oda told them. Now, I'm gonna basically read you the translation here that I personally came up with from this entire section. It's fairly short, about an hour into the podcast. And here's basically how the conversation is going. So, you used to do theory videos on YouTube, right? And then Seiya says, yeah, I did. So, were they accurate? Well, some things haven't been revealed yet, but it's hard to say how much I can talk about. I mean, I kind of know Oda-sensei now. Calling him a friend would be overdoing it, but we do message online, which, by the way, having Oda online, which is kind of WhatsApp or Messenger, the messenger app that people use here in Japan. So that's a pretty big deal, I would say. And he then says, even today we exchanged messages like, this was hilarious and stuff like that. So they do talk about One Piece apparently, and videos that he makes. So I would say they're pretty close if they're just casually texting. And then the really infamous part that went viral and is like so misunderstood came next. Translation, quote, he's like a god of manga. Agreed? So if someone he messages is out there doing fan theories, that might feel unpleasant. That already big difference, because he's kind of talking about a friend who's doing theories about his show and then is asking Oda, hey, what do you think about all this stuff? And then he says, yeah, so I kind of stopped doing these theories. Apparently he doesn't really like them too much. Yeah, seems like he doesn't, better not to do them then.
でもやっぱ嫌らしいけどな、考察とか。ああ、そうなん。ああ、嫌みたいよ。ほな、やめとけ。So
I think that just puts a very different context and nuance on this entire situation. That, again, everything that's gonna come after this little segment is still relevant and still plays into all of this, but it does kind of paint a very different picture where this person did get the feeling like Oda isn't too much of a fan, especially probably when you personally pester him with all of that, right? Like, if I had Oda on my phone and I did a theory video, I'm like, hey, by the way, what do you think about the idea that Chopper is the forest god, Oda? And he's like, can you please let me work? So I think that's a big difference. Basically, this entire thing is someone texted Oda and he got like, it's a lot of hearsay, so be a bit careful with, taking everything you read on the internet for granted, I guess is the first one. Yeah, apparently this person also had some theory, for example, this is the D in the D clan, does it stand for a smile? And Oda actually said, well, it's actually not too far from the truth, which is a cool little thing. That might be a whole video on its own that Oda likes. I was like, okay. Oda liked the smiley face D theory. That's kind of cool. But yeah, again, very big difference. So it's not a direct Oda quote. It is from this podcast, from this person who does occasionally text with Oda about the story. And I think that kind of puts this all into like a different perspective and a lot more nuanced perspective. It also explains a little bit better, I think, why Yuderon might have taken this as a nod to himself, where he listened to this and he heard like, okay, Oda doesn't really like theories too much. And then one of the podcast people in this podcast says, well, maybe better to stop doing them then. Though maybe Yuderon took that as everyone should stop doing theories, unless Yuderon is also friends with Oda. I don't know. Maybe he is. I wouldn't be surprised. But to me, it sounds a lot more like it would be the podcast guest telling the podcaster, hey, if you guys are friends and Oda doesn't really appreciate, you bothering him with his own theories or, having theories from friends, then probably better to not do that. And I think that is just so different from some of the other comments and interpretations that I've read on the internet. Now, once again, take it with a grain of salt here. It's a lot of hearsay and very unclear. Even like what I've been looking at in the Japanese internet is kind of confusing, but this seems to be, at least as of recording, the actual source here, unless I'm really missing something else where Oda actually went on record saying this. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt, but this seems to be the actual statement in question. And with that being said, let's now get into the rest of this video. Again, everything here still stands, still valid, but this is a very big piece of context and nuance. And the first thing that's important to comment here on, I think, is that a while ago, 2 or 3 years ago, Oda actually had a different comment about YouTubers where he kind of, expressed his feelings that it's kind of surprising to him how close some people have come to uncovering some of his secrets, and that he actually kind of enjoys consuming One Piece theories, which apparently now has gotten to the point where they have gotten, at least some of them have gotten so good and so close to what he actually does that, he kind of feels a little bit threatened. Not so much in the sense that I think some people take it that he's afraid that people will figure out his secrets and then, I wanted to write this, now I can't write this anymore because someone else, obviously already, figured out what I wanted to do here. I don't think Oda has a real problem with that per se, because we already do know that if he really wants to, he can just change things. And sometimes in the story, he just builds things, up fairly obviously, so it's okay if people get something right. So instead, I think the main point of Oda's complaint or criticism here, if you can even call it that, is that he is afraid that his writing as a creator, as the author of One Piece, might suffer due to him consuming this type of content, because if you watch channels like mine or channels like Yuderon's or other channels that really deep dive into One Piece on a regular basis, I would assume that you are very, very familiar with a lot of things that most casual fans might not be. Now, this of course goes on a spectrum from just being a very casual One Piece fan who kind of knows who Luffy is, and you've probably heard about Gear 5 and you maybe, watched a little bit here or read a few chapters there, all the way to you read every single chapter, every single character, all the theories out there, and, are familiar with pretty much all the important concepts, mysteries, and theories that are existing in this entire space. And so Oda himself, as the author, is of course automatically on this ultimate end here where, he knows everything because he creates everything. And if he consumes content of channels that, speculate on that same level and that goes so deep on his, manga and on the anime, just flipping over every single phrasing and, Kainu speaks in a Hiroshima dialect and so does Hibari, so they must be related. Like, we're talking about that level of depth where we know everything and we kind of have already built these clusters of theories on this channel as well. I mean, you will know I go into a lot of detail when it comes to, for example, recently diving into the past and potentially like Nika's history and Joy Boy's history, making certain assumptions and taking certain things for granted that maybe for the casual average viewer and reader are just not obvious at all. And I think Oda's worry here is that if he consumes these high-level analyses, whether they're wrong or not, I don't think he's really talking about whether the theories are right or wrong here. He's really talking about the content he's consuming is by people who understand the story to such a granular, detailed level that he's worried he will just take for granted that everyone who reads his story and consumes One Piece just knows everything. And that, of course, is not the case. And I think his worry here is, well, if he writes the story for the hardcore fans, the, more casual fans will not know what's going on anymore. They will not remember certain things. They will not have, realize that this was a piece of foreshadowing or that these two characters are connected. You kind of get the idea. And I think his main argument here is, I need to stop consuming this content by these people because otherwise I'll lose basically touch with my actual core audience, which is the most casual people who sometimes pick it up or just pick up the volume here and there and then, have a good grasp of One Piece but don't know every single thing and everything that's speculated every single week. And this little detail you missed on page 4, panel 5 of the latest chapter, right? You get the idea. I have a lot of friends, especially here in Japan, but also abroad, who just, pick up the new volume when it comes out, read it, enjoy it, and then they kind of move on until the next volume comes out a couple of months later. And in between, they will remember, the big plot points, but they won't know who this specific character is and that, Dorian Broggy already popped up on Little Garden like in chapter 264 or something. And actually, this is something that I can relate to as a question as a creator a lot as well, because obviously here on the channel, we talk about very specific stuff related to the most recent events that happened in One Piece. And I often think to myself, okay, we're looking at things at such a microscopic level, making so many assumptions that people do know all these details. When a new viewer comes and wants to watch a theory or wants to watch a video, aren't we also as creators running the risk of being way too specific and expecting way too much knowledge from people watching? And I think that's actually a very good, thing to ask myself too in my videos. Are the videos accessible enough for someone who's just a casual fan, is curious, wants to learn, but then can't even consume content because, it's kind of almost expecting you to have this perfect, all-encompassing knowledge and grasp of the story. Now, this of course brings us also to the second part of this news, which is Yuderon, quitting YouTube over these news. Now, it's really interesting because he is a Japanese creator and clearly he understands more about what Oda is saying here and probably reading more between the lines. In Japanese, that's called kuki omeru, literally reading the air. So you're kind of reading more the vibe that the other person is trying to convey, like reading between the lines. And clearly Yuderon here came to the conclusion apparently that Oda was directly criticizing channels like his. He is a Japanese creator who goes into immense detail with his stuff and kind of took that as criticism and a nod to please from the creator himself, I don't like what you're doing here. Which obviously is not what Oda directly is saying here, but I can kind of see how you could maybe interpret it that way. Now, I for one, just to state it clearly, think it's an absolute shame that Yuderon apparently decided to stop making videos because he is a genius. He understands One Piece like maybe no one else. He finds details and connections that I think no one else can find, and he has taught me so much more about the difference between reading One Piece in the original Japanese and all the things that encompasses and many things that get lost when translating everything into English. Now, you might be wondering at this point what these, nuances and details are, and just to list a few things, one big thing that, Yuderon even brought attention to for me is the so-called goro awase, which are word plays with numbers in Japanese. Now you might have heard about these, for example, with the Straw Hat's Devil Fruits. All of the Straw Hat's Devil Fruits, like Luffy's Gomu Gomu no Mi, are basically can be turned into numbers. So Go is 5 in Japanese, mu is mutsu, so 6 in Japanese, so 5, 6. All of Luffy's bounties, with a few exceptions, have the numbers 5 or 6 in them. And then there's like really cool theories that you might have heard about, like the Hana Hana no Mi is the 8 and 7. So you have 5, 6, 7, 8. So the only 2 fruits that are not, or the only 2 numbers that are not represented in the devil fruits of the Straw Hats are 2 and 9. And so therefore there's a big theory that Q, 2 and 9, the Nikyu fruit, which is Kuma's pawpaw fruit, might be eaten by a future Straw Hat. So little stuff like this, but it goes way deeper into, numbers hidden in chapters and so on and so forth. And we do actually know that Oda does love to do these things. And now that I think about it, I do kind of wonder if the reason was actually Oda's statement here, or if Yuderon just said himself, hey, am I taking the fun away from the people who watch my videos, who just want to enjoy the show, and I'm potentially spoiling them and overanalyzing this? And if that were the case, I would also be sad, because again, I hope if you watch this channel sometimes and consume One Piece content, I'd like to think at least that consuming theories and stuff about shows like One Piece just doesn't take away from it, but much more enriches the experience for everyone. Because let's be real, first of all, 99.95% of all theories end up being wrong in some way, shape, or form. Either they're completely wrong, most commonly, or maybe they get like an aspect or something right. But in the end, I think it's very rare that people actually straight up call things correctly. So then what's the allure? Why do people really enjoy watching theory content? I think the reason I used to watch it and now I love making theory videos, it's that it's just so much fun to think about a story that I love so much and that I know so much about. So speculating what might happen, who might get what new powers, is this character connected to this character? Who's Luffy's mother? It's just fun. We only get a manga chapter every week if we're lucky. More often there's breaks in between. And so filling this time that we get to ourselves with new material and new information, with speculating, I think is just the most natural thing in the world. You're never gonna, have people stop theorizing. You're gonna have it for any show that gives you any amount of speculation, whether that's Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings theories, still a thing almost 80 years after the story has been written, right? I'm thinking recently I watched The Blacklist on Netflix. Even that, speculating about who the main character actually is and all the connections there. I think it's a compliment about your work as an artist if people enjoy theorizing and, discussing what you talk about. And that's, again, exactly why I think that Oda is not criticizing theories at all, but just straight up says, I can't consume these because it's gonna influence my writing. And I think that's absolutely fair. I mean, if I were writing a story and I was watching people speculate over it, it would probably influence me. Am I actually gonna, do this thing even though people have already called it? Or am I going to do something else that doesn't have any foreshadowing and then feels kind of like an ass pull? Or again, the main problem that he addresses here, is it going to make my writing less accessible because I think everyone knows all the little details and every single character that I've created as well? In the end, part of what makes One Piece such a unique and special story for all of us is the fact that we get to speculate and that Oda gives us so many awesome mysteries. Every single chapter, we almost get something new about a new character, a new group, something in the past. I mean, Wano, Egghead have all been insane, and basically every time we get answers for anything, we get new mysteries, 4 new mysteries for each answer that we get answered. It is so much fun that he has created this world of mystery and intrigue and hidden knowledge, and how could you not want to speculate and find out what he's trying to do and go for here? And so I think my verdict here would be that people have been misinterpreting this. I think Yuderon, for the right or wrong reasons, might have decided that this was a good point for him to quit. Maybe there were other circumstances surrounding this decision that we just don't know, you and me. Maybe he was just a little bit burned out or whatnot. There are other reasons, and he might have just taken this as a good moment to stop. If not, I do hope that he comes back at some point. I really, really appreciate his work. I'm really curious though what you think. Let me know if you interpret this statement from Oda differently, what you think about One Piece theorizing, if you think it's better and healthier to just sit there and consume the story and not talk about it at all. I'm very curious. I'm going to read through everything. Otherwise, I will see you very soon. Thanks so much for listening to my rambling, and goodbye.